In our previous video, we looked at trait theories of leadership. Now we're going to look at behavioral theories of leadership. Behavioral theories of leadership say we can train people to be leaders because there's certain actions that differentiate effective leaders from ineffective leaders. So what are these actions, these processes that make for more effective leaders? Well, there's some different studies on different behaviors that can lead to effective leadership. So let's start with the first one listed here from the Robbins textbook. This one looks at the University of Iowa and identifies behavioral dimensions in terms of democratic, autocratic, and laissez-faire style. So essentially it is taking work from whom? We've talked about these three types of leadership before. Whose work is this? These three types of leadership. Well, if you recall, the democratic, autocratic, and laissez-faire style leadership came from Lewin. We talked about Lewin before. We were talking about autocratic leadership, and we were talking about the type A personality. And so, of course, the autocratic leadership is a single decision maker, expects the subordinates to do what they say. They're focusing on efficiency, productivity, quick decision making. Of course, the downside is it can alienate employees and it can micromanage people, which employees don't tend to like. In comparison, we have a democratic leadership style, which is more of a team-based approach, focuses on creativity, employee engagement. But the downside, of course, with teams is that we can tend to see social loafing, that is, individuals who just expect everyone else to do the work. And also when we have teams, it takes time to get things done, and that makes it harder to adapt quickly, whereas the autocratic leadership style allows for quick decision making. The third type that we've looked at before is the laissez-faire leadership style. Here is where management or leaders delegate the authority to others, and individuals who are skilled and self-motivated can shine. Of course, the challenge is that if your employees are not engaged, then there's lots of lost productivity because we're expecting the employees to step up when they may not. Well, according to work by the University of Iowa, the preferred style is the democratic style of leadership is most effective when it comes to leaders. Now, it's not clear in all the studies that this was the case. Just some of the studies tend to show a preference for that democratic style. Possibly because as the studies we're looking at happen primarily in North America, where we are all independent, and as individuals, we think that we should have more autonomy, that we should have more respect as an individual. You know, we all want to be seen and heard, and so the democratic approach in terms of preference by subordinates here allows for employees to be engaged and to have some of that participatory management that we seem to value here. There are other studies. A study coming out of Ohio State looks at consideration. So do leaders consider followers' ideas and feelings? And then how structured is the work and the work relationship in order to meet the job goals? And what they found is effective leaders had both consideration for their subordinates' feelings and also had a structure that allowed for the subordinates to perform. Again, not clear in terms of it always being the most effective style of leadership. So what we're seeing in terms of these studies here is that because it wasn't clear in all studies that these were the dominant behaviors that lead to effective leadership, we're going to see in the next video that what comes out of this is more of a contingency approach to leadership, when perhaps there is a preferred behavior given a certain situation. So maybe the best behaviors, there's not a one best behavior in every situation, is what we're starting to see come out of these studies. But in this early work on behavioral leadership, it was to try to identify what behaviors, what processes led to the most effective leadership, with the idea that there was one best behavior for an effective leader. The third one we're going to look at here is some work done by the University of Michigan, looking at employee-oriented and product-oriented. So here we're looking at, do we emphasize interpersonal relationships So the relationship between the employee and the employer? Or do we emphasize more the task and the technical aspects of the job? So what the University of Michigan found is that employee-oriented leaders were associated with higher group productivity. So a greater relationship between manager and employee led to higher productivity and higher job satisfaction. So think back to the work on the Hawthorne effect and the work from Mayo, right? This aligns with that in terms of when the manager showed attention to the employees performed better. So that relationship between the manager and the employee is important in terms of productivity and here in terms of employee job satisfaction as well. Well, if we look at employee-oriented versus product-oriented, this work is done or is continued on by an individual named Robert Blake and Jane Mouton. So Mouton was an undergraduate student of Blake's at the University of Texas. And then they later went on to work together as consultants, and they were hired by Exxon. And what they were looking for is they wanted to find a leadership approach that's in between McGregor's X and McGregor's Y theories. So recognizing that maybe there is a need for a more X approach and more Y approach. So what were those? What was McGregor's X and Y? Well, if you recall, so McGregor's X said that workers had little ambition, management needed to tell them what to do, have tight control over them, micromanage them in terms of that work. And theory Y was the other extreme, where the workers enjoy the work, they seek out responsibility, and the role of management was to empower employees, give them more responsibilities and opportunities to shine. So Blake and Mouton were looking for something in between in terms of a leadership style, because both are too extreme. And so what they came up with is what is called the managerial grid. So what they're doing is they're plotting different leadership styles based on, as we saw with the University of Michigan, that employee orientation and that product orientation. So we can look at concern for production on one scale. So how well are we meeting the outcomes and hitting the goals? And then concern for people on the other scale. So then how are we doing in terms of that relationship between management and employee and taking care of employees' needs? And so what they identified is 5 different leadership styles based on this managerial grid. So if you have low concern for production, so you're not meeting your goals, and you have low concern for people, then the style is indifferent, or in their original version, impoverished. That is, as a leader, your sole thing is to avoid getting into trouble. So you don't want conflict with people, you're not going to be engaged too much with your subordinates, and you're not engaged in terms of outcomes for the organization. You're hiding out. Okay, avoid getting into trouble, but not doing a whole lot of work. Then we have what they call the country club style, or what's now called accommodating, which is a low concern for production and a high concern for people. So these are the need for affiliation individuals, if we go back to previous theories we've discussed, where the security and comfort of your employees is your foremost concern. The idea here is that if we have happy employees, they will increase their performance. So we're really focused on the happiness of our employees. And that is focused so much, and we're really not focused on outcomes in terms of goals. So we're essentially focusing only on motivation and happiness of our workers and kind of ignoring those financial controls and some of that productivity measures. That's the other aspect of management. Then there is the role where you are concerned for production. So we're really about meeting those goals, meeting those performance requirements, productivity, financials, and not so concerned with people. And this one is called producer perish, now more modern. Now it's more called dictatorial. So this type of individual, according to Blake and Mouton, is more of that theory X. So it's really about rules and punishment and making sure people do what you tell them to do. And it is more that McGregor theory X. And if we go back, right, in terms of that authoritarian, dictatorial, tight control, make sure that people perform. And if you leave them to their own devices, they're not going to work. They're going to avoid responsibility. What we see from Blake and Mouton is an advocating for more of the theory Y. And so they put theory Y as a team style. Some people call it today a sound leadership approach. And the idea here is a high concern for production. So we still need to meet our goals. We need to be productive. We need to meet those outcomes. And at the same time, high concern for people and relationships. And so they're saying the best approach in terms of behavioral leadership is to go with more of that theory Y approach of management in terms of focusing on empowering your workers, giving them opportunities to shine.